Welcome to The Explainer. Right off the bat, I am so thrilled to have you here today because we are diving straight into a topic that affects literally every single one of us. Doesn't matter your age, your career, your background, this hits home. Today, we are performing a mathematical autopsy on the current Social Security crisis. Now look, there are a lot of emotions, heavy politics, and heated debates floating around this topic. But as always, our goal is to strip all of that away. We're strictly looking at the math, the raw data, and the demographic realities presented in our source material. And honestly, the numbers we're about to unpack are absolutely fascinating, but also pretty terrifying. Okay, to really understand the temperature of this debate, let's start with a direct quote from our source that pulls absolutely no punches. It claims, millennials are being robbed by boomers. They will likely never see a dime of the money they're being taxed. Wow, that is an incredibly provocative statement, right? It perfectly captures this massive wave of generational frustration out there right now. But we have to ask, is this just emotional hyperbole, or is there actual hard math backing this up? Our job today is not to validate anyone's frustration, but to neutrally test this exact claim against the raw numbers. We are going to see exactly what the data has to say about the future of this entire system. Here is our clinical roadmap for doing exactly that. 1. The 2032 ticking clock. 2. From pyramid to cylinder. 3. The immigration math problem. 4. Impossible political choices. And 5. The source's bleak conclusion. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The 2032 ticking clock. The 6-year countdown. Before we can even start talking about fixes, we have to understand the immediate stakes, because this isn't some hypothetical issue for the next century. The Social Security system relies on a surplus trust fund, but according to official government projections, that fund runs completely dry in the fourth quarter of 2022. Think about that. That leaves Congress with effectively just 6 years to pass a meaningful rescue. The clock is ticking fast. So, what actually happens if lawmakers hit that 2032 deadline and just do absolutely nothing? Well, by law, it triggers an automatic 22% cut to all benefits. Why? Because without that reserve fund sitting there as a cushion, the program can literally only pay out what it brings in, and incoming tax revenue will only cover 78% of the promised payouts. That means an immediate, across-the-board pay cut for every single senior relying on the system. Section 2. From pyramid to cylinder. The demographic shift. To really understand the origin of this disease, we have to move away from dollars and cents and look at the underlying demographic geometry. When Social Security was created way back in 1935, it was fundamentally designed as a pay-as-you-go system. The money, taken out of your paycheck today, does not go into a little personal savings vault with your name on it. Instead, today's workers are paying directly for today's retirees. The entire survival of the system relies on maintaining a very specific balance between the people paying in and the people taking out. But here's the thing, the geometry has completely flipped on us. Back in 1960, the US population looked like a massive pyramid. You had a huge, broad base of young workers at the bottom, supporting a much smaller group of retirees at the peak. In fact, there were over 5 workers paying taxes for every single beneficiary. But today, our population shape has morphed into a cylinder. We have a massive, aging baby boomer bulge at the top and simply not enough young people at the bottom to support them. The geometric foundation of the program has collapsed. And the data shows this trend is only accelerating. The math requires a replacement rate of 2.1 to stay level. But get this, the 2026 Trustees Report recently adjusted their assumed ultimate fertility rate down to a mere 1.75 children per woman. So birth rates have absolutely plummeted, meaning that cylinder shape is getting narrower and narrower at the bottom, right while it's expanding at the top as life expectancy grows. The math simply doesn't support a pay-as-you-go structure anymore. Section 3. The immigration math problem. Testing the demographic fix. You will very often hear that mass immigration is the silver bullet for this crisis, right? The idea is just bring in more young workers. But the math is incredibly revealing here. To maintain the necessary ratio, using just physical bodies, the source estimates you would need to add between 6 to 8 million people to the system every single year. Aside from whether that is politically feasible, relying purely on bodies completely ignores a massive economic mismatch at play. And this leads us to what the source calls the wage trap.
Social Security is funded by percentages of your income, not flat fees. If you bring in a worker making, say, $20 an hour, they pay roughly $5,158 a year in taxes. Because of that, you need roughly 9.3 of those low-wage workers paying into the system just to fund one single high-earning retiree drawing a maximum benefit. It is definitely not a simple one-to-one ratio.
So when you put it all together, the source points out three major flaws in the immigration argument. First, the wage trap we just discussed. Second, the compounding debt. See, when those low-wage migrants eventually retire, the progressive formula of Social Security actually replaces a higher percentage of their income. That means you'll need an even larger population boom to pay for them down the line, essentially creating a demographic Ponzi scheme that requires infinite growth. And third, the high earner requirement. To actually fix the math with reasonable population numbers, every single immigrant would need to be a high earner paying maximum taxes, which simply isn't the reality of global migration. The math just doesn't pencil out. Section 4. Impossible political choices, the paralysis in Washington. Okay, so if the demographics are broken, why aren't politicians fixing it? Simply put, because the remaining mathematical cures are political poison. Option A is an immediate tax hike of 4.42% on every single working American. Option B is letting seniors take a 22% pay cut in 2032. Raising taxes obviously terrifies politicians, and slashing elderly incomes terrifies them even more. So Washington remains in a total stalemate, completely refusing to touch the third rail. Because both of those options are basically political suicide, the source argues that the most likely escape hatch they will use is a general fund bailout. This means lawmakers would simply abandon the whole concept of Social Security being a self-sustaining, earned benefit program, and instead just start dipping straight into the general government fund to make up the difference. But let's see how that builds into an entirely new crisis. If they actually initiate a bailout, the source outlines this devastating cascade of effects. Step 1. The government has to borrow trillions of dollars from massive deficit spending. Step 2, this drastically increases the national debt. Step 3, to manage that runaway debt, the government naturally resorts to printing more money. And Step 4, that printed money devalues the currency, effectively taxing today's workers through permanent compounding inflation. The burden doesn't disappear, it just gets hidden in your rising cost of living. Section 5. The source's bleak conclusion, the millennial reality. I want to reiterate that we are strictly presenting the final prognosis as argued by our source material here. But wow, their conclusion is incredibly stark. They argue the system is a mathematical fantasy. Millennials are involuntarily funding a closed system to pay for the baby boomer generation right now with absolutely no realistic expectation of ever seeing a return on their money. The source concludes that by the time millennials reach retirement age, the entire system as we know it will have to be completely abandoned because the math fundamentally refuses to cooperate. It is a really heavy conclusion, but an incredibly important one to analyze through a strictly mathematical lens. We've seen how the demographic geometry has completely shifted under our feet. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. If the math of this system inherently requires a pyramid, can a cylinder society ever truly save Social Security? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structure helped clarify the complex forces at play here. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the raw data, and I'll catch you in the next one.